Our gospel reading this morning is from Luke chapter 12. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God.' He said to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not keep striving for what you are to eat and what you are to drink, and do not keep worrying, for it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well." Hear these holy words of wisdom. So I have a little confession to make. When I was looking at what the gospel reading was going to be for this Sunday, I groaned. Like, really? Lectionary, New Brunswick Day, long weekend, a holiday weekend, and we have a story about money. Everybody's absolute most favorite topic in church, right? Money. And so we look at the gospel reading for this morning, and we see all throughout it this focus on this stuff that we absolutely need in our lives. I don't think anybody in this room could get by without a bit of money. If you can, please raise your hand, right? I think many of us actually misunderstand what Jesus is trying to convey with this parable that he told. Don't really understand the context in which he spoke it. So I'd like us to go through it a bit this morning and see if we can understand what was Jesus saying to the people then, and what does it really matter to us today. This story told so long ago, and yet so reflective of how people are the same 2,000 years ago and into this very day. It starts off innocently enough. We have somebody. I love that description. It says, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." Jesus' response, "What on earth do I have to do with you and your brother and your family inheritance? Am I to be a judge or an arbitrator over you?" But we can really understand the person's perspective, thinking, I'm trying to get my fair share, Jesus, and Mommy said that you could help me, right? If my brother won't share with me, maybe you could help me get what's rightfully mine, right? Tell him that I deserve my share, my portion. And so Jesus comes up with a rather interesting response. He says, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. It's like, Jesus, I wasn't doing this to be greedy, right? This was simply the family inheritance. I'm one of the siblings. I'm entitled to my fair share. So Jesus, what's this about greed? I'm not being greedy here. I just want what's rightfully mine. But Jesus continues, he says, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Uh-oh. Where's he going to go with this one? And then Jesus begins to tell a story. He tells a story about this rich man, this person whose lands produced an extra abundant crop that year. So much produce, so much fruit of the land, so much grain that the storehouses that he had simply weren't enough. He needed to get a storage unit down the street, right? He had too much stuff, needed a bigger house. And so he says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to tear down my barns and I'm going to build bigger ones. I need more room for all of my stuff. And that's what I'll do. And I'm going to say to myself, self, soul, now that you've got all this extra room, all of your stuff laid up there in storage, kick back, relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Sounds like a good plan, doesn't it? Right? For so many of us, we work most of our lives to save into RSPs. We look into our pensions. We're trying to make sure that we're going to have enough so that when retirement rolls around, we can kick back, eat, drink, and be merry. Many of us, however, I think have the same issue as this person in the parable that Jesus told. We ask ourselves, well, is it really going to be enough? What if I outlive that projection? Right? Aunt Susie lived to be 102, right? But my RSP is only going to last until I'm 98. What am I going to do? If I don't have for those last 4 years, I need to put more in and more and more. And so as Jesus begins to tell this parable, it becomes uncomfortably easy, I think, to see ourselves in that man's position. Not out of a sense of, I want this all for myself, but rather in the sense that I want to ensure that I have enough. Not too much. I'm not asking for a trip to Fiji every year, but just enough that when the hydro bill comes in, I can pay it, and that I can pay my property taxes every year and maybe have a nice little vacation, but nothing real extravagant. And so we see the man in this parable and think, well, there's nothing really wrong with that. Until Jesus gets to the end and God at this point says to him, you fool. Oh, thanks, God. Right? This very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves but are not rich toward God. It's a bit of a challenging statement, isn't it? Thinking of storing up treasures for ourselves and not being rich toward God. Because our mindset around money and possessions is that we just want enough. But Jesus invites us to struggle with the question, when is enough enough? Right? And when is enough actually too much? As we dig deeper into the heart of what Jesus was saying, we notice something in particular. And I want you to listen closely. I'm going to put some emphasis here. As the man is having this kind of inner monologue with himself, and he says, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Notice something about that man's inner dialogue or monologue? It was all about me, myself, and I. Never once in this man's consideration did he think about all of those laborers who actually planted, who harvested, and ensured that his land actually produced. All he could see was me, myself, and I, so that I'm comfortable, that I have enough. It's my land, my grain, my me. What Jesus is really getting at is less about the possessions themselves, but our relationship to them. He says the real issue for this man wasn't the fact that he had stuff. All of us have stuff. But rather he saw it as his stuff and his alone. No thought about where was God in all of this. No thought about all of those, particularly in that time and place, who would not have enough grain for one day, while he had enough stored up for the rest of his life. For Jesus, it was much less about those possessions, but what the man recognized or failed to recognize in his relationship with all of those around them. Jesus says that is the true problem, that focus on the individual rather than the good of the entire community. As he ends that parable with, it's best to be rich toward God. In other words, be rich in that relationship that you have with the one who ensured that all of this stuff that you have was actually available. The one who brought you into life and to being, along with all of those whom you would consider your neighbor, your families, your friends. Jesus says it's not the stuff itself, but rather how we look at that in relationship to God and to all of those around us. So for me, I think it's a bit easier to think about the money aspect here. When we recognize that it's less about those dollars and cents and more about the relationship. And as Jesus continues in his story and engaging with his disciples, we have that whole lesson about the lilies of the field, and we've all heard that part before. But it gets to the end and he says, and do not keep striving. In other words, don't put your focus, don't go after exclusively food and clothing. He says, don't keep worrying. God knows you need those things. Instead, strive for the kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. For Jesus, it's about changing the focus. Get rid of that preoccupation that we're not going to have enough. He says, trust that God will ensure you have the necessities of daily life. He says, focus instead on this relationship with others. He says, strive for the kingdom of heaven. Strive for that ideal world in which justice abounds. Strive for that time and in that place where all people have enough, where no one goes hungry, where no one goes without a roof over their head, where no one goes without hearing the words, I love you exactly the way you are. Being rich toward God means changing our perspective from me, myself, and I to being rather, how can the things that have been accumulated under my management, how can they be used to ensure that everyone has enough, that all people are given the daily necessities of life? And so as we think about money, right, on this New Brunswick Day long weekend, we recognize that it is truly not about that stuff, but our relationship with it and our relationship with other people. So strive for that right relationship with God. Examine all that you have and ask the question that Jesus invites all of his hearers to ask of themselves. How can I use what has been entrusted to me to bring about the kingdom of God in the here and now, to ensure that all have enough? Not an easy thing to think about, but one I think that Jesus time and time encourages us to do. How can we right with God and with one another through the use of the things that have been entrusted to us. Not me, myself, and I, but you and we together. Amen.